Welcome to the Stoic Responder Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Healy. As a special agent who spent more than 15 years conducting large-scale fraud, money laundering, and public corruption investigations, Stoic philosophy provided a mindset edge that became the foundation of my professional success. My mission today is to share those same ancient mindset lessons with you so that you can turn obstacles into opportunities and adversity into advantage. Time to muster up. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Stoic Responder Podcast. If you are listening to this on the day that it is dropping, it's November. Made it through another month. Congratulations. And we're 5 days away from silly season, really kicking off. And or maybe it's been silly season for a month and a half or 2 years or however long presidential campaigns last these days. But if you've made it to November, we're almost done. We're almost through it. And then we get to have the fun of not knowing who won for the next week or 2 weeks or 3 months or however long. I've been doing this whole voting thing since 2000. That was my first election as an adult when I had the opportunity to vote. And of course, that was famous for us, dealing with, the Florida recount and hanging chads and, dimpled chads and all this stuff that if you're of a certain age and lived through it, you remember. And so I'm never expecting election results on the day of, and I try not to get worked up about it because I know that I'm just one man who can cast one ballot, and at the end of the day, it's up to my fellow Americans to make the right decision, and we just hope that no matter who wins, that everybody acts like an adult. And so that's about as much as I'm going to say about that. But maybe next week when I check in, maybe we will have answers. Who knows? But long story short, guys, we've made it to November, and that means we're 10 months through the year. We've only got 2 more to go, and that is incredible to me because it feels like just yesterday I was celebrating New Year's, and this year has sort of flown by. I don't know if you feel the same way, but it is a reminder to me as a Stoic, as a practicing Stoic, that time is the only resource we have that's not renewable. We can never replace it. We can never do anything to get it back, to put more on the clock or the calendar. And when I wake up and it's November all of a sudden, and I think, my gosh, what have I done with this year? What has happened this year? It's just a good reminder to me to treat each day like it's a full lifetime lived and to squeeze every drop out of it that we can. And I hope you do the same. So as we turn the page to November, let's turn the page into today's topic. We're going to be focused on justice today. Let me start you out with a quote. Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question. What fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize? From Marcus Aurelius. Okay. Again, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast. I talk about Marcus Aurelius is not writing this advice for you. He's writing this for himself. He's reminding himself, the emperor of Rome, who, for all intents and purposes, could criticize anyone he wanted to. There was nothing that could stop him from criticizing anyone. But he's reminding himself, whenever you're about to find fault with someone, hold a mirror up. Is essentially what he's saying. If you're ever about to blame somebody for something, why don't you first look in the mirror and recognize that you are human as well, and that the person you're about to criticize has faults for sure, but you do too. This is such a great line of advice, and I cannot believe that somebody with all the power of the emperor of Rome would be telling himself to live by this metric, but it's incredible to me, and it's something that I need to do more often. It's something that each of us needs to do more often, in fact. Because it's a real problem. And I think this is probably maybe a great one to think about right now with the election coming up, with the presidential election coming up, because what is it that, the candidates are basically running on? I mean, we can talk about, there's this policy or that policy that's different, but more and more often in modern politics, people are running based on not being the other person. And that becomes true all the way down, right? If you are a person who is is a fan of a candidate. And I've tried my best in my life not to become enamored or become a fan of any particular candidate because they're all human, they're all flawed. But a lot of your identity gets wrapped up in I'm not them, right? You never hold up a mirror to yourself and say, the people that I'm criticizing and pointing the finger at, what about me most closely resembles the people I'm pointing the finger at? And I think our politics would be a lot better if we did that every once in a while. You see, this is called fundamental attribution error, and it's a cognitive bias that describes our tendency to attribute other people's behaviors to internal dispositional factors while underestimating the influence of situational factors, right? So there's different ways that we can approach this. In simpler terms, what it means is when we observe someone else's behavior, we're quick to attribute it to their personality, their attitude, their intentions. We're quick to attribute it to a fault of their personality, right? Without fully considering the external circumstances or situational factors that might have influenced their actions. Meanwhile, when we analyze our own behavior, we're more likely to forgive. We're more likely to attribute it to the external, such as the situation, or to provide context for the situation that we find ourselves in at the time, right? The guy who cut you off in traffic is a classic example. And we deal with this every single day. I know I do. My daughter would tell you I do, because she sits in the back seat and hears me gripe about whoever just cut me off. The person who cuts you off in traffic might be an aggressive jerk, might not be an aggressive jerk. What if they just made a mistake? Haven't you been in that person's shoes before? Haven't you pulled out, not seen a car, or changed lanes, and someone was in your blind spot, you almost hit them and they beeped at you? And you know what that person's doing? They're sitting in the car honking their horn, flipping you off and saying, that guy's a jackass, right? They are attributing to you a cognitive bias. They are saying, that person, let me attack the personality traits. Let me attack their attitude. Let me assume the worst of that individual without fully considering the external circumstances that you found yourself in, i.e., you have a blind spot. You just didn't see it. Or maybe, you looked over into your mirror, but you didn't look over your shoulder. And then before you change lanes, right? It happens all the time. And you've sometimes been the person in the car that gets cut off, and sometimes you've been the person doing the cutting off. You've been in their shoes. And we all do that same thing, where you would forgive yourself that behavior because, oops, I made a mistake, but you don't forgive someone else's. You see it as a personality flaw, that person must go through life being an inconsiderate jerk because they cut me off, never remembering that once in a while you're the inconsiderate jerk. You see, there's an interconnectedness to this entire human experience, right? We talk about this all the time. Just as we are quick to notice the faults of others, so too are they likely to perceive our own shortcomings that we don't notice. In politics, this happens all the time. Your argument is flawed and you're this, that, and the other thing, and I am going to attribute that to a personality problem, to you being a bad person, versus maybe you just haven't thought this through in the way that I have, or maybe you're less engaged on this topic than I am. Maybe you're approaching it from a different life experience, and you have a different set of values, and you've been raised a different way, or you believe different things. You see, it's not always a personality trait. It's not always a failing that causes someone to do something different than you, but we do that a lot. We focus in on faults and don't perceive our own. So instead of focusing on the perceived shortcomings of those around us, what Marcus Aurelius is telling us is hold up a mirror. We do better to turn our gaze inward. We do better to examine our own flaws and weaknesses before we criticize someone else's. And when we acknowledge that there's this mutual vulnerability between us, between all people, it helps us foster some empathy and compassion in our relationships, in our interactions with strangers, because we recognize that we're all navigating the complexities of this life together, right? We just happen to be sitting here plunk in the middle of Earth in our little 76-year journey. We just happen to be occupying the space and time at the same time. And that means that we are all dealing with the same external complexities, right? So before casting that stone, before calling names, before attributing somebody's behavior to personality flaws, hold up the mirror to yourself. Before you throw that stone, remember that each and every one of us is living inside of the same glass house. Let me leave you with a quick note here. I want you to take out your Big Chief notebook, take out your pencil, write this down. I want you to recall a time that you attributed internal faults to someone's behavior. And I want you to put yourself in your imagination in that person's shoes and write about their actions from a first-person perspective. Now, if you're a cop, this could be somebody that you've arrested. This could be somebody that you dealt with in the public, maybe somebody you pulled over, somebody who was running their mouth at you or whatever. Put yourself in their shoes. Imagine the experience from their position and write about from a first-person perspective. And then see yourself through their eyes. See how they may have perceived you. It's one of those good exercises that we should do every once in a while, one of those mirror-holding exercises that force us to look inward. And hopefully what this will do for you is that the next time you get cut off in traffic, the next time something happens, the next time someone acts like a jerk, you pump the brakes, both physically and metaphorically, as you pump the brakes, and maybe catch a bubble, as the kindergarten teachers say, bite your tongue, and recognize that you've got your flaws too, and save some of that vitriol. Don't feel the need to light them up the way that you might otherwise. So I'll leave you with that. Folks, if you want to support this podcast, if you're getting anything from it, if you're enjoying these episodes, do me a favor, pick up a copy of my book. That's pretty much the only way that you can support the podcast financially, is by buying a copy of my book. It's called In Valor 365 Stoic Meditations for First Responders. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you get your books. It's a great way for you to practice this philosophy on a daily basis. It becomes a great resource for law enforcement and first responders who want to practice this philosophy daily. I'll give you some quotes, some contextualization that's directly relatable to your job, as well as some daily journal prompts and action items to help you integrate these lessons. Number 2, you can subscribe to the Stoic Responder for free at thestoicresponder.substack.com. And you can get these episodes delivered directly into your email, so you never miss them. They'll come in 4 times a week. And then if I write anything like a weekly leadership lesson based on Stoic philosophy or Stoic personal development tips, you'll get that too, all for free. And finally, the best way to support this podcast without even taking out your wallet is to like, share, and subscribe so that others can learn about what we're doing here and gain from the lessons. I think that Stoic philosophy, if you've heard me give a speech before, if you were at the Blue Watch event in Alabama last week and you heard me give a speech, you know how passionate I am about this philosophy, because I believe it does so much to create resilience in individuals. And I can't think of any trait that is more essential to a first responder than the capacity, basically the capacity to take on more, the capacity to deal with adversity. And that is what resilience is. I think this is the best philosophy for helping to gain resilience. So do me a favor, share this podcast with someone who needs to get a little bit more resilience in their lives. Thanks so much. I got one more episode for you this week. Until next time, you are out of roll. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, like, rate, and share this podcast so that we can spread the benefits of Stoicism to other first responders. It will only take you a few moments, but it can help us tremendously. Until next time, out of roll.